The sun was high when the transport truck pulled into the ranch. A line of teenage Japanese POW girls stepped down, but one of them made the cowboys pause. She was tiny, her legs like sticks, collarbones sharp as wire, cheeks hollowed by months of hunger. Someone chuckled, said something about scarecrows. Another tossed a comment too cruel to repeat. But the girl didn't flinch. She just stared forward, blank as dried paper. She was 15, maybe. Then came the routine medical check. A medic pushed up her sleeve. Gasps filled the barn. Her forearm was mottled with old fractures, some healed wrong. Her ribcage bore faint, patterned scarring. She weighed under 70 pounds. And the blood work showed starvation, dehydration, and untreated infections. No one laughed after that. What the cowboys saw wasn't a prisoner of war. It was a child who had survived something unfathomable. And for the first time, they looked at her differently. The truck had arrived under the noon sun, its engine coughing dust into the dry Texas air. A half-dozen girls stepped down slowly, blinking into the harsh light, their uniforms rumpled, their hair tied back with whatever rags they'd had left. Most were teenagers. All were thin. But one girl, the last to emerge, was so small, so frail, that even the wind seemed hesitant to touch her. Her bare feet met the dirt with no sound. Her face was unreadable. Skin stretched too tight over cheekbones that looked like they'd been carved, not grown. The cowboys had seen POWs before, but never like this. They stood near the barn, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, hats shading eyes narrowed against the light. One of them muttered, "Ain't no older than my niece." Another squinted, then let out a breath that sounded more like pity than laughter. But one young, brash, eager to impress, let out a short laugh. Hell, she couldn't lift a shovel if she tried. There was nervous laughter, a snort. Another cowboy leaned over to his buddy and said, "I thought they were supposed to be dangerous." The girl didn't look dangerous. She didn't even look alive. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stood there, arms at her side like wooden planks, eyes locked on something far beyond the ranch horizon, something no one else could see. "A scarecrow," someone said later. She looked like a scarecrow, with bones too brittle to hold a shadow. But no one knew what to do when she didn't move. Not out of fear, not out of defiance. Just a sort of absence. Like she'd already disappeared inside herself long before her boots hit Texas soil. They called roll. Someone else answered for her. "Kiyomi," the translator said. The cowboy holding the clipboard furrowed his brow. "How do you spell that?" But the girl Kiyomi offered no correction, no nod, no acknowledgement that the name even belonged to her. When ordered to walk, she walked. When told to stop, she stopped. Not slow, not fast. Mechanical, obedient, as if she was being pulled by invisible strings. As the line of girls was directed toward the barn for processing, one cowboy leaned back on his heels and muttered, "Bet she's never seen a real horse." Another cracked, "Or real food." They didn't mean it cruelly. Not really. Not yet. They were filling the space between disbelief and discomfort with words that felt like control. They didn't know what to make of girls who looked like bones in uniform, stepping into a world that smelled of leather, hay, and freedom. Inside the barn, Kiyomi stood near the wall, while the others shuffled toward their cots. She didn't look around. She didn't ask questions. She didn't even seem curious. That's what rattled them. Even animals flinched. Even dogs tilted their heads. But she just stood, still as glass. Her eyes scanned nothing. When a cowboy offered her water, she took it without looking at him. When a gust of wind kicked dust across the floor and made the others blink or cough, She didn't move at all, and in that stillness, something started to shift. One of the older guards, a man who'd fought in the Philippines, leaned against a beam and said under his breath, "She's not just tired, she's somewhere else." He wasn't talking about geography. That night, the wind howled across the plains. The girls were given blankets, beds made of hay, and bowls of steaming stew. Some of them whispered, some cried softly, but Kiyomi sat on her cot, back straight, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wooden wall in front of her. No tears, no words, no blink. And, for the first time, one of the cowboys turned away, not because he was disgusted, but because he didn't know what to feel. Shame, maybe. Guilt. Confusion. He'd come expecting warriors. Instead, he found a girl who looked like she'd already survived a war that no one here would ever understand. Before Texas, there had been ash, not the soft kind that drifted from campfire smoke, but the bitter, choking kind that coated rooftops and throats and clung to skin like grief. In Nagoya, the bombings came like thunder from a cracked sky. Kiyomi had been barely 13 when she watched her neighborhood vanish. One moment, there were streets with old bicycles and vendors selling bean cakes. The next, the sky glowed orange and the air howled with the sound of collapsing homes. Her mother had thrown a wet towel over Kiyomi's head and dragged her into a trench dug behind a neighbor's chicken coop. From there, they watched the sky fall. Afterward, there was nothing left but silence and the smell of burnt paper. Roofs were patched with flattened tin cans. Water came from cracked pipes. Her mother boiled weeds for supper, the broth so bitter Kiyomi once gagged and was slapped not out of cruelty, but desperation. Her father had died on a transport ship early in the war. Her older brother had joined the army with a stiff salute and a promise to return. He never did. Only the rice bowl he once ate from remained, chipped at the edge. Kiyomi washed it every night, just in case. When the recruiter came, he wore a navy uniform and a rehearsed smile. "The Emperor needs loyal daughters," he'd said, handing out rice crackers as if they were medals. Kiyomi's mother bowed low, whispered, "Do your duty," and didn't look back when the truck pulled away. The title was Te Shintai Voluntary Women's Corps, but there was no choice. Girls scrubbed floors, folded blood-stiff sheets, and carried buckets of boiling water down dim hallways. They worked in the shadows of shrieking wards, where wounded soldiers groaned through gauze and morphine dreams. There was a poster pinned in the break room, an American soldier with fangs dragging a woman by the hair. Below it the words screamed, "This is your fate if you surrender." The older nurses didn't question it. "Better to die clean than live dirty," one whispered to her after a girl collapsed in the hallway and wasn't given water. Kiyomi nodded. She didn't know what else to do. Words like honor and shame became rules as unyielding as bone. She was taught how to bow in front of death. She was never taught how to grieve. They practiced with wooden sticks, pretend rifles, and were told that if captured, they were to bite off their tongues before giving the enemy satisfaction. Some girls laughed nervously. Others didn't laugh at all. They believed it. All of it. So did Kiyomi. But then, one day, everything changed. The head nurse turned off the lights and said the war was over. No celebration, no explanation, just orders. Pack what you have. Report to the courtyard. Await transport. Some girls wept quietly. One pounded her fists against the wall until her knuckles split. The Emperor's voice had crackled through a radio that morning, distant and solemn, saying they must endure the unendurable. It didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like mourning. Kiyomi folded her apron carefully, set it on her cot, and walked out barefoot. They were herded onto trucks like crates of silent cargo. No one explained where they were going. Rumors swirled. Some said Siberia. Some said labor camps. One whispered they would be thrown into rivers. The guards didn't speak. They didn't smile. Kiyomi stared at her knees the entire ride. When they reached the coast, American soldiers stood at the dock, not with guns raised, but with clipboards and translators. A man with soft eyes motioned her forward and checked her name. He pointed to a ship. It wasn't a prison barge. It had real bunks, metal trays with food, soap. Kiyomi didn't trust it. She ate the rice with shaking hands, left the meat untouched. When they handed her a blanket, she rolled it into a tight knot and didn't sleep. The ship groaned westward across the Pacific. The ocean stretched out like a question with no answer, and somewhere behind her, Nagoya burned in memory. Somewhere ahead, Texas waited foreign, dusty, and unknowable. She hadn't blinked when the bombs fell. She didn't blink now. The hold of the ship was dark, low-ceilinged, and smelled of rust, sweat, and the sour bite of seasickness. Kiyomi sat pressed between two other girls, all of them too thin to take up space, their knees drawn to their chests as the floor rolled beneath them. A single yellow light flickered above, barely holding back the dark. The engine hummed with the weight of 100 secrets, and no one spoke unless they had to. Some of the girls had thrown up on the first day, the second, and then again on the fourth. Others just stared, faces pale and damp, eyes fixed on the wall like it might eventually offer an answer. Kiyomi did not vomit. She barely moved. Her hands were folded in her lap, thumbs gently brushing each other out of habit. She counted the bolts in the steel above her, then started over. Sometimes the sound of waves thudded against the hull, deep and low, like footsteps of something ancient pacing just outside. The American guards didn't come below often. When they did, they passed through quickly, checking that no one was dead, that nothing had caught fire. They didn't yell. They didn't strike. That, more than anything, unsettled the girls. On the third night, trays were brought down. Metal, cold to the touch. On each one, 2 slices of white bread, a scoop of something creamy, and a ladle of warm broth. The girls stared at the food like it might breathe. Kiyomi sniffed it. There was no mold, no rot, no sharp metallic scent, just starch, salt, and something unfamiliar. A guard motioned to eat. One girl whispered, "It's a trick." Another clutched her stomach, too weak to resist, and ate anyway. Kiyomi took a cautious bite of bread. It was soft, too soft. Her teeth sank into it like clouds. It confused her tongue. There was no grit, no sawdust, no bitterness. Just the bland, unnerving neutrality of abundance. The broth was warm, though it tasted of something she couldn't name. She sipped it slowly, waiting for pain, for consequences. None came. But she didn't finish. Her body craved it, yes, but her mind refused to trust it. She wasn't ready to believe the enemy fed prisoners like they fed themselves. Days blurred. No one knew how long the voyage took. 5 days? 10? There were no clocks, no windows, just the endless rhythm of steel and sea. Some of the girls whispered in the dark, speculating what lay on the other side. Prisons, camps, interrogation rooms, they'll divide us, one said. Strip us, test us, sell us. Another muttered that Americans kept women in zoos. Kiyomi said nothing. She didn't believe in monsters anymore, but she didn't believe in mercy either. When the ship slowed, the silence felt different, tight, expectant. The girls were herded up onto the main deck, squinting as sunlight hit their eyes like a slap. The air was clean, startlingly so. No smoke, no ash, no chemical tang, just salt and wind and the faint smell of pine or grass carried from some distant shore. They clung to the railing and looked. There, rising like something from a postcard, was a coastline that hadn't burned. Buildings stood whole, roads stretched without potholes. There were no sirens, no rubble, no skeletal trees. Just America. The ship docked. Boots clattered on the wooden ramp as soldiers lined up. Not snarling, not shouting, just watching, writing, organizing. As the girls disembarked, Kiyomi kept her gaze forward. A man took her name, checked a clipboard, handed her a slip of paper with a number. She waited for the blow that never came. Buses waited nearby. Old army transports refitted with benches. The girls were loaded in, and the convoy moved inland. Through windows, Kiyomi watched a world she didn't understand. Children played near fences. Women walked in dresses. Men smoked pipes on porches. Every field seemed green, every barn intact. At one stop, a cowboy, broad-shouldered, sun-tanned, rifle resting against his knee, watched their bus roll by and tipped his hat. She stared at him. No fangs, no chains, just a man with dust on his boots and curiosity in his eyes. And in that moment, Kiyomi understood. This was not the world she had been warned about. It was something stranger, something more dangerous. It was kind. The barn door creaked open as the girls were led inside, its hinges complaining softly, as if even the building was unsure what to make of them. Warmth rolled out to meet Kiyomi, thick with the smell of hay, leather, and something savory that made her stomach clench without permission. The space was wide, its wooden beams darkened by age, lanterns hanging from hooks and casting amber pools of light across the dirt floor. This was no prison block. There were no concrete walls, no iron bars, no shouted orders echoing down corridors. Just stalls, stacked bales of hay, and the slow, steady breathing of animals settling in for the night. A cowboy gestured toward a corner where hay had been piled neatly, a wool blanket folded on top. Kiyomi stared at it. A bed, not a mat, not bare ground, a bed. She approached it slowly, half expecting someone to shout that it was a trick, that she'd misunderstood. When she touched the blanket, it was coarse but clean, warm from the day's sun. She recoiled at first, then sat, rigid, hands clenched in her lap. Every instinct told her not to relax. Comfort had always come with a cost. Around her, the other girls whispered. One cried quietly. Another laughed once, sharply, then covered her mouth in shame. Kiyomi said nothing. Her eyes tracked every movement, the swing of the barn door, the shadows of boots passing outside, the way the cowboys leaned against the fence, hats tipped low as they watched. Not leering, not hostile, just watching, as if they were trying to understand something that refused to make sense. Then came the stew. A man approached, carrying a dented metal pot, steam curling upward in thick, fragrant ribbons. He ladled the contents into tin bowls and handed them out one by one. When he reached Kiyomi, she froze. The bowl hovered between them. The smell hit her like a memory she wasn't ready to face. Beef, onions, salt, something rich and oily that made her mouth flood and her hands tremble. She took the bowl because she was told to take it, not because she trusted it. She set it on the ground beside her bed and stared. The stew glistened in the lantern light. Chunks of vegetables bobbed at the surface. It looked generous, too generous. Back home, soup had been gray water with a promise of flavor. Here, It was thick, heavy, alive with scent. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she didn't lift the spoon. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, warning her of poisoned gifts, of enemies who smiled while killing you slowly. Kiyomi pushed the bowl away an inch, then another. A cowboy nearby frowned. "Why ain't she eatin'?" he asked quietly. Another shrugged. "Maybe she's sick." A third snorted under his breath. "Scared of soup?" There was a short, confused laugh. Not cruel, just baffled. Kiyomi heard none of it. Her gaze flicked to the barn door again, to the shadows, to the corner where a rope hung coiled like a sleeping snake. Her shoulders tightened. She waited for the punishment, for the order, for the slap that would follow refusal. It didn't come. Minutes passed. The other girls ate, some slowly, reverently, others like animals unchained, tears slipping down their cheeks as they shoveled food into mouths that had forgotten fullness. The sound of spoons against tin filled the barn. Kiyomi's stomach growled loudly enough that she flinched. Heat rushed to her face. She reached for the spoon, stopped, pulled back. Then something broke. Not loudly, not all at once, just a quiet snap somewhere deep in her chest. She lifted the bowl with both hands and drank straight from it. The heat burned her lips. She didn't care. The taste flooded her mouth, salt, fat, warmth, and her body betrayed her completely. She choked, coughed, then drank again. Faster, desperate. Tears spilled without warning, blurring the lantern light into streaks of gold. She ate until the bowl was empty, until her hands shook, until her breathing slowed. When she finished, she sat there, stunned, staring at the scraped clean metal as if it had confessed something unforgivable. Her shoulders curled inward, bracing for shame. None came. No one shouted. No one mocked her. The cowboys had gone quiet. The cowboys had gone quiet. One of them cleared his throat. "Hell," he murmured, not unkindly. She was starvin'. Kiyomi lay back on the hay, clutching the blanket to her chest, eyes wide open. Every sound made her tense. Every shadow felt like a threat. She could not stop looking over her shoulder, because kindness, she had learned, was not supposed to exist here. And yet, as the lanterns dimmed and the barn settled into night, the stew stayed down. So did she. The next morning, the medic came with a clipboard, a pencil stub, and the kind of expression that said he already knew more than he wanted to. The girls were lined up one by one beside the barn's side door, and one by one they entered the makeshift infirmary, an old tack room with a table for a cot, a curtain for privacy, and a rusted scale that creaked louder than it weighed. Kiyomi was the fourth girl called in. She walked slowly, blanket still wrapped around her thin shoulders, eyes scanning every corner like a mouse checking for traps. The cowboy stationed at the door leaned his shoulder against the frame and watched her go in. She hadn't spoken a word since arriving, hadn't smiled, hadn't cried. Now she disappeared behind the curtain, and within minutes the murmurs began. "Jesus," the medic whispered, more to himself than anyone else. He was crouched beside her, lifting her arm with careful fingers. It bent too easily. The wrist was so small he could close his thumb and forefinger around it and still have space. He pressed against the skin. It didn't spring back. There was no water in her, no cushion between muscle and bone, just sinew and silence. He lifted the blanket and paused. Bruises, faded yellow ones near the ribs, older purple smudges near the knees, thin white scars in unnatural patterns down her back. Her left collarbone jutted out more sharply than the right. When he touched it, she didn't wince. "Fracture," he muttered. "Healed wrong." He checked her weight. 68 pounds. He looked at her face again and saw nothing, no fear, no discomfort, no surprise, only that eerie, endless calm, like she'd left her body behind long ago, and only the shell had made it to Texas. The cowboy at the door asked, "Well?" He didn't look away when the medic stepped out, but he shifted his weight, the way men do when they already suspect the answer. "She's busted up bad," the medic said. "Starved, dehydrated, old breaks that never healed. Might be infections, too." He paused. "And young, real young." The cowboy didn't say anything at first, just looked past the door at the sun climbing over the fence line. A horse neighed softly from the corral. Chickens pecked at dry patches of earth. The world, somehow, kept moving. Inside, Kiyomi sat still as the curtains swayed behind the medic's exit. Her feet didn't touch the ground from where she sat on the exam table. Her hands lay flat on her thighs. She didn't look down at her bruises. She already knew them. Back outside, the mood shifted. The other cowboys, who had been joking the day before about scarecrows and featherweights, now stood with their arms crossed, their eyes a little lower. One scratched at his chin and muttered, "She got bones like glass." Another nodded. "Ain't a fighter," he said. "More like a stray." No one laughed. No one mocked. Someone brought over a canteen. Another fetched a folded towel, unsure what it was for, but needing to do something. The jokes had run dry. They watched her step out a few minutes later, still wrapped in the same blanket, but now somehow even smaller in the light. One of the older cowboys removed his hat, not for the sun, but like he might at a funeral. Kiyomi didn't see it. Or maybe she did. She gave no sign. What hung in the air then wasn't pity. It wasn't sympathy either. It was recognition. This wasn't an enemy. This was a casualty. The lines between soldier and victim blurred in the Texas dust. No medals, no flags, just a girl with silent bruises and too many stories carved into her skin. A body doesn't lie. And now the cowboys finally saw the truth they hadn't been prepared for. She hadn't come from a battlefield. She was the battlefield. The next day, no one gave orders. The sun climbed slowly over the ranch like it was trying not to wake the wounded. Kiyomi emerged from the barn still wrapped in that same coarse blanket, now clutched not out of fear, but habit, like a second skin. A few of the other girls drifted toward the fence line where the chickens were already clucking. Someone handed her a tin cup of water and stepped back without saying a word. No shouting, no barking commands, just space. By mid-morning, Kiyomi found herself crouched near the chicken coop, a basket beside her, small hands reaching into warm nests for eggs. No one had told her to do it. She simply followed the other girls, who seemed to understand that idle hands bred anxious thoughts. Some swept the barn floor. Others folded clean linens brought from the ranch house. The chores weren't assigned, just available, offered like a strange kind of language that didn't require words, a way to do something soft after so much hardness. Kiyomi moved with care, not from weakness now, but from intent. Her fingers brushed straw aside. She cupped each egg like it was made of glass. The chickens didn't flinch around her. Maybe they sensed what the cowboys had just begun to grasp, that she posed no threat, that her silence wasn't defiance, but survival, that gentleness wasn't absence of strength. At first, the chores were small. Folding linens that still smelled faintly of soap and sun, refilling water troughs, brushing down barn cats that arched into her touch before darting off. Each act, minor on its own, began stitching a thread back through the torn fabric of her days. They weren't just chores, they were rituals of care. of control, of choosing to tend instead of destroy. And in that choice, something stirred. When she fed the chickens, she watched them jostle and flap, feathers flying, beaks dipping into grain. They squabbled and settled, oblivious to the fact that they lived, that they were alive. And it struck her like a soft blow life had once been this simple. Before bombers, before flames, before doctors barked orders over hospital beds in voices sharp enough to cut, there had been a garden once. In Nagoya, her mother had grown bitter melon. It had withered in the ash, but she remembered the green. Now here she was, feeding hens in Texas, and the color returned not as memory, but as motion. One cowboy in particular noticed. He wasn't the loudest, didn't chew straw or swagger the way others did. He had quiet boots and slower hands, the kind used to horses that spooked easy. From the porch rail, he watched Kiyomi with narrowed eyes, not suspicious, not unkind, just searching. When she paused to watch a chicken roll in the dust, he tilted his head slightly, as if trying to understand what she saw. When she balanced a stack of folded linens with careful precision, he didn't interrupt, just nodded once when she looked up. That afternoon, he passed her an apple, not tossed, not dropped, handed, gently. She didn't take it at first. Then, after a long pause, she reached out. Their fingers didn't touch, but something passed between them anyway. He said nothing, neither did she. But something shifted. He began showing up near wherever she worked, not hovering, not helping, just present. A respectful shadow. He never asked her name. She never asked his. It didn't matter. Names were things people used in the world they came from. This was something else entirely. In the silence of the ranch, amid the rustle of hay and cluck of hens, Kiyomi found herself doing something unfamiliar, breathing without bracing. She still slept with one eye open, still flinched at sudden movement, but for the first time in a long time, her hands did not tremble when they reached for life. But that morning, for the first time, she didn't hesitate when the older Japanese woman gently touched her shoulder and motioned toward the ranch house. It was bath day. At least, that's what the gesture suggested. The woman carried a rolled towel and a change of donated clothes in her arms, her chin lifted with a kind of quiet reverence. Kiyomi followed. She didn't know what to expect. Hot water had been a memory even before the war turned her city to ash. The ranch house smelled like wood polish and lavender, and the bathhouse just beyond it hummed with steam. She stepped inside barefoot, the planks warm against her soles, and then warmth, moist, enveloping, almost sacred. The tub wasn't much, just a deep basin fed by a stove-heated pipe, but to her it was a shrine. She slipped in with the help of the older woman and nearly gasped. Heat moved through her like light cracking open a cave. She hadn't known she was still capable of feeling this. As she sank deeper, every inch of her skin, raw, bruised, tight over bone, seemed to breathe again. The water wasn't scalding, just enough to loosen the memories crusted onto her body. Weeks of dirt, smoke, dried blood, and the invisible film of fear. The other woman handed her a bar of soap. It was pale, floral, oval, like a polished stone. Kiyomi held it in her palm like it was alive. Then she began to scrub. The soap made a soft squeaking noise against her skin. Bubbles formed, then dissolved, and with them, something else. Each motion of her hand across her limbs was deliberate, almost painful. Her ribs protruded like fence posts beneath her chest. Her arms were all angles. She wasn't washing filth away. She was peeling back layers. The girl who had curled into corners, too frightened to eat, too starved to sleep, too proud to beg, she was slipping into the drain, one bubble at a time. Her hands paused at her neck. There had been a bruise there once, purple like shame. It was gone now. She kept scrubbing anyway. And then she cried. No sound, just tears that blended with the steam and soap. She had not cried when the bombs fell, not when she saw her neighbor's baby limp in the rubble, not when she left her mother behind. But here, in Texas, in a wooden tub smelling faintly of lavender and starch, her face cracked. Outside the window, voices rose, male, casual, cowboy laughter. But something was different. She heard them teasing each other in English. Playful jabs. Someone complaining about boots left in the mud. No slurs. No snarls. No voices raised in accusation. She couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. And this time, none of it was directed at her. One of them walked by the window, saw the shadows of the girls inside, and tipped his hat before moving on. Respectful. After the bath, the older woman handed her a worn but clean dress. Cotton, faded pink. Kiyomi slipped into it with slow movements. Her skin still tingled. She smelled like someone she didn't recognize. She tied the sash with trembling fingers. When she stepped outside, blinking in the late afternoon light, one of the younger cowboys looked up. He was leaning on a post, whittling something from a stick. He grinned, but it wasn't mockery. "You look like a Sunday morning," he said softly, more to himself than to her. She didn't understand the words, but the tone she understood. Something had changed. Not everything, not yet, but the skin she walked in now, it was hers again. The night air wrapped around her shoulders like a quilt, cool, earthy, threaded with the scent of mesquite smoke. Somewhere past the barn, the cowboys had lit a fire. She could hear the soft twang of a harmonica, its lonely notes curling upward into the stars. The sky was so wide here it made her dizzy. A woman invited her to come closer, motioning gently with her hand. Kiyomi hesitated, then stepped forward. The fire crackled in the center of a loose circle, cowboys in shirt sleeves, leaning back on their elbows, boots crossed. One of them was shuffling a deck of cards, worn at the edges. Another passed around tin cups filled with something warm and sweet. Not a word of Japanese was spoken, but no one barked orders. No one glared. One cowboy tipped his hat when she sat down. Another gave her a curious smile, then dealt her in. The game was simple enough. Match cards, slap the table when a pair showed up. At first, she fumbled, unsure. But they didn't laugh at her, they laughed with her. A man with sandy hair made a dramatic show of losing every hand. When she finally slapped down a matching card before him, his eyes went wide, and he let out a theatrical groan. Everyone burst into laughter, and so did she. It came out of her like a hiccup, unexpected, loud, unguarded. Her hand flew to her mouth in shock. She hadn't laughed since before the bombings. She wasn't sure she even remembered how. The girls in her unit had whispered at night, sometimes told stories. But laughter had been dangerous, too loud, too human, too alive. Now it spilled out of her like sunlight through a crack, and immediately, guilt followed. She looked down at her hands. These same hands had helped carry the wounded, had sorted bandages stained with the blood of boys who never came home. These hands had once trembled while tying a red ribbon around her braid on the day her unit was ordered to relocate. What right did she have to laugh? But when she glanced up, no one looked angry. No one looked betrayed. One of the women older, maybe a former schoolteacher by the way she carried herself, just nodded at her, as if to say, "It's all right." and something loosened in her chest. The harmonica played a tune she didn't recognize, slow and swaying. Someone roasted corn on the edge of the fire. The cowboy, who'd lost most of the card games, leaned forward and held up his hand. He mimed confusion, then placed it flat over his heart and pointed at her. Kiyomi blinked, then understood. He was asking her name. She said it softly. Kiyomi. He tried to repeat it, botched the pronunciation, made the others laugh again. But not at her, at him. It felt good. She looked around the circle, firelight flickering across faces that, not long ago, she'd been told were monsters. She remembered a propaganda film once shown in the hospital basement, grainy footage of American soldiers with wild eyes and snarling mouths. But these men didn't look like that. And they weren't treating her like a prisoner. Not tonight. A strange question began to form inside her, slow and heavy. If they treat me like this, why didn't we? Why had kindness seemed like treason? Why had they been easier to hate before she saw their eyes? Why had her people told her to fear soup, but not starvation? The harmonica fell silent. A coyote howled in the far distance. And Kiyomi, no longer certain of anything, tucked her knees to her chest and watched the fire dance. Are you finding this story as powerful as we do? If so, please like the video and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. The next morning, she asked for paper. It surprised the camp matron enough that she blinked and looked up from her tin of biscuits. Kiyomi repeated the motion with her hands, writing, carefully miming the curve of a pen. The woman hesitated, then nodded. A few hours later, a worn envelope, a pencil stub, and a folded sheet of yellow paper were placed gently into her hands. It felt heavier than expected, not physically, but in meaning. She hadn't written home in months. The last time was a dictated message scrawled on a military template, cold, precise, censored before it even left her mouth. But this was different. The camp had no rules against it. No one stood over her shoulder. And so she sat on a stool near the barn's open door, sunlight pooling at her bare feet, and began to write. Mother, I am alive. The sky is open here. The men do not touch us. They do not scream. We eat rice sometimes. I sleep on something soft. I am warm. The pencil paused. She could have ended there. But something pressed behind her ribs, like a truth demanding to be spoken. They are kind. She stared at the sentence for a long time. Her heart thudded in her ears. In Japan, such words would be considered betrayal, or worse, delusion. Everyone knew what Americans did to girls like her. Everyone had heard the warnings, how they tore fingernails from spies, how they lured nurses with smiles, and then buried knives between their ribs. And yet, this letter spoke only of warmth. She folded it carefully, tucked it into the envelope, and handed it to the cowboy who collected outgoing mail once a week. He didn't read Japanese, just nodded and tipped his hat. The letter never made it to her mother. Somewhere in a mailroom in Tokyo, it was intercepted. A military censor, trained to detect codes and morale threats, unsealed the envelope. His brow furrowed at the neat hiragana. He read it twice. Then again. There was no hidden code, no mention of unit locations, no secret plea. Just this. They are kind. He underlined the phrase, circled it, then passed it up the chain. By that evening, a stack of reports had been attached to it, each speculating whether the writer had been coerced, drugged, or broken. No Japanese girl would write this. One officer scribbled in red ink, "No Japanese soldier should believe this." Another wrote below, The letter was quietly shelved, forgotten. But back in Texas, something unexpected arrived for Kiyomi. A small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, a red ribbon. It had belonged to the daughter of a rancher, who'd grown too old for braids but remembered the feeling of one tied tight before school. She'd seen Kiyomi crouched near the chicken coop that morning, hair unkempt, face half in shadow. The ribbon was her way of saying, "You look like someone who matters." Kiyomi held it in her fingers for a long time. Back in Nagoya, she had worn a red ribbon when she followed her mother through the wreckage of market stalls. It was the only color left in their lives, tied tightly so her mother could find her if they were separated. Now she tied this new ribbon slowly, gently into her hair. She did not cry, but she touched the knot twice to make sure it held. There, in the mirror shard above the wash basin, she no longer looked like a ghost. She looked like a girl, and by the end of that summer, she looked like a different girl entirely. Not the shivering shadow that stepped off the truck, not the starving body with bruises hidden beneath fabric. Now, she stood straighter. Her eyes held the kind of stillness that came not from fear but from watching too much and surviving all of it. Kiyomi weighed 102 pounds. That number, penciled into her chart by the camp medic, meant more than just fat and flesh. It meant recovery. It meant time. It meant she had eaten stew without flinching, swallowed eggs without suspicion, and slept through an entire night without dreaming of bombs. Her shoes were new, not issued, but gifted slightly too big, with soles meant for gravel and grass, not rubble. Inside her satchel was a hard-bound diary. In its pages, sketches of hens, half-written questions in awkward English, fragments of poems she remembered from home, and a sentence she had written and rewritten in different ways. Why were they kind to me? The answer never came in full, but the question, simply asked, had become a part of her now. The morning of departure was unceremonious. No parade, no orders barked, just a roster read from a clipboard and the rumble of tires over dirt. The girls lined up in near silence. Some clutched bags, others looked at the sky. Kiyomi wore the red ribbon. A cowboy stood near the fence, arms crossed. He didn't speak, neither did she. But just before she stepped onto the truck, he tipped his hat. One slow nod. She returned it with a slight bow, more natural now than mechanical. A gesture between equals. No words were needed. Words, after all, had never been their strongest language. The ride was quieter than she expected. No crying, no laughter, just wind. As the ranch faded behind them, Kiyomi did not look back. She didn't need to. The memory of it was already etched in the fibers of her being, in the smell of hay, the feel of soap, the echo of laughter beside a fire. They boarded the ship in San Francisco. This time, she wasn't herded below deck like cargo. She walked up the gangway under open sky. On board, someone handed her a thin blanket. She didn't grip it like a shield this time. She folded it across her lap, looked at the horizon, and listened. The ocean didn't roar that day. It breathed. She clutched the diary in both hands and began to write as the coastline shrank behind them. Dear self, you thought you had died, but you didn't. You were taken, yes, but also given. Given space, given time, given strange men with soft hearts and dusty boots. They fed you, clothed you, laughed near you, but never touched you. They sang, they waited, they watched you become real. You are real again. She closed the book. When they docked in Yokohama weeks later, the platform was crowded with soldiers, nurses, and thin-lipped officials. No one recognized her. Her name was called. She stepped forward, and for the first time in nearly a year, someone asked, "Name and condition?" She opened her mouth. "My name is Kiyomi," she said, softly but clearly. "And I am, well, if this story moved you, please like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And thank you for remembering a story the world almost forgot.